Hello everybody and welcome to Lois and Morgana Davidson Art. It's Morgana here, and today I'm here to share with you this lovely simple summer line and wash tutorial which I call Birds on a Wire. So for this painting I was inspired by this reference photograph that I found on petsales.com. As you can see, it's a lovely artistic shot. I decided to use my own artistic license to simplify it down a little bit and just do my own interpretation of it. And the first step of that is, of course, doing a pencil sketch that includes the key elements. So for me here it was the sort of the telegraph pole on the left with the broken light sort of jutting out on the right, and of course getting a few of those crisscrossing wires in place. Then once you're happy with your pencil drawing, the next step is to go over it in pen. But do make sure you use a waterproof, bleed-proof ink. I use these lovely Pigmamicron fine liners. This is a size 02, which is a really great fine all-rounder. You can get them individually or in sets, but the ink is both waterproof and archival, which means it's light fast as well, so it's ideal for this sort of work. So I decided to add detail into my drawing with the pen. This is simply because I really like the effect that the fine liner gives if you use it quite loosely rather than pressing firmly to create a smooth line, which is what I've done to outline these core shapes. You can see I'm now shading using the pen. I'm holding it really quite lightly and almost sort of lightly stuffing it over the paper in a similar way as you would with a brush when you're doing dry brush, to create a sort of a broken line that looks quite patchy, but it's also going to work really beautifully to get a sort of a beaten up, grubby, rusty effect on this old pole here, which is what I'm going for. You can use these in a similar way as you would use a pencil. You can see here to create light areas and dark areas just by going over the lines and strengthening them where you want it to be a little bit darker. You can see I'm adding some shadow here on the left hand side and leaving a slightly lighter area on the right. Now this is the sort of painting that is in some ways both quite easy and quite difficult. Easy because the painting part just sort of is a lovely sort of wash over the top of what you've already done, and hard of course because the painting sort of lives or dies on these key details that you get in here with the pen and the pencil. So really it does test your drawing skills, but I found that I really enjoyed doing this one, so I really hope that you guys do as well. Just something slightly different from usual, and I found it really fun. So just continue with that shading all the way up and down the telegraph pole until you're happy with the lights and the darks that you've created. You can see here I've left a few sort of patchy areas, a few paler bands, just bits of detail, and I'm really happy with how this looks. So now it's time to add in the wire detail. To do this, you can see I'm using a ruler, and I'm using a slightly thicker pen. I'm using a 08 size Pigmamicron fine liner to give me a nice bold line, and I'm just coming out there with the ruler and just getting my lines really nice and straight and really crisp. Obviously you can do this without the ruler if you so wish, but my hand I know is not nearly steady enough to get these lines absolutely straight and beautiful without the ruler, and I'd rather not waste the drawing that I've just spent some time on. So I'm using the ruler. I'm making sure all my lines connect and intersect. I'm also simplifying down a little bit from the photograph, which had many crisscrossing sort of wires and cables, and whilst it looked lovely in the picture, I decided it was just a little bit too much for the painting, where things can easily get muddled and muddy and a little bit too complex. So these are the wires that I've drawn in. I'm leaving it at that. There's not as many here as there is in the photograph, but I'm kind of fine with that, you know. I think this is enough. I'm pleased with the composition, I'm pleased with the ink work. So now it is time to paint. You can see I've broken out an old favourite brush to try today. This is my extra large Harkay brush that I'm using to just mop over the sky very quickly. I'm doing a nice fresh coat of clean water first because I'm going to do a really simple wet and wet sky to go over this ink work. I'm starting with just a touch of raw sienna to add in a little bit of warmth here. You can see I'm washing it on really pale with plenty of water. You can see this is also the test of my ink pens. You can see they are completely waterproof. They are not running or smudging in any way, thank goodness. So now I'm using this lovely bright cerulean blue to finish off the rest of the sky basically. This is the only blue that I'm going to be using because I just think it has that lovely sort of brightness and clarity of a high summer day. And I'm also using this lovely Princeton Neptune 1-inch size brush. This is a small modeler brush, perfect for this sort of work because it's got a really great paint and water capacity, as you can see. So at the moment I'm working on building up the colour, and the reason I'm using a relatively small brush to cover a relatively large area of paper is I want to create the kind of sky here that's known in the UK certainly as a mare's tail sky, which is a lovely sort of bright blue sky with streaks, sort of directional streaks of fluffy white cloud drifting across it, almost like the threads of a horse's tail coming across the sky here. So this is why I'm leaving lots of pale patches on the paper for the clouds, and I'm trying to keep my brush strokes really quite directional, following this diagonal that I'm creating on the paper. Now, of course, you can always use other colours if you prefer in your version of this painting or any of these paintings that I share. I always just share my colours as a guideline, and because if I don't share them, people often are curious. I think a lovely cobalt or ultramarine sky would look really effective here as well. I'm also using hot press watercolour paper, which is so lovely to work on because it's wonderfully smooth, but that does come with some advantages and disadvantages. So an advantage is that it's wonderfully smooth to draw on, so the line work is really easy to do. You don't have to deal with the texture of the paper on top of everything else. And one slight disadvantage that some people do find with hot press is that it tends to sometimes be a little bit streaky if you're trying to get like a really nice clean wash. It's a bit unforgiving because you don't have that texture in the watercolor paper to carry the paint and to carry the water and to help with effects like blending, diffusing, granulation, all that sort of stuff. You know, it's really fun paper to work on, but like all things, it comes with its limitations. But I'm actually trying to take advantage of that sort of characteristic of hot press here by creating this streaky sky that doesn't actually rely on these sort of soft blends and soft diffusions and bands of colour, where we actually want the lines to remain quite clear and to get these lovely sort of soft streaky white areas of cloud. So this is what the wash looks like now that it is completely fully dry, and I must say I'm pleased with how the blue and the white and the little bit of raw sienna there has all softened together really beautifully. I think it's created a lovely soft, relatively simple background, but still with some movement and some life in it, which is going to be an excellent backdrop to the urban sort of details that I'm now going to begin concentrating on. So coming in with a little bit of burnt sienna, which is a wonderfully versatile paint, and a flat brush to begin adding a little bit of rusty detail and texture into the pole. You'll notice that this time I didn't put any masking fluid or drawing gum over these details to protect them from the main wash. That's because I knew that the colours I'd be using to fill in this detail, so the burnt sienna and a little bit of Payne's grey, they're going to be strong enough to stand up against this very pale cerulean blue wash that I put down. But it is something to bear in mind if you do decide to use a bolder colour for your sky, for your backdrop, so something like an ultramarine blue, or if you decide to dip into some lovely bright sunset colours, then you may need to use some masking fluid to protect certain details from those strong colours if you want to paint over them using paler ones afterwards. As you can see here with the flat brush, I'm not putting a wash over the entire pole. I actually really like these little pale patches sort of peeping through, perhaps areas where the wood has sort of splintered slightly and aged away, you know, in the bright sun under the summer sunshine and faded a little. So we got this lovely contrast of the black ink, the lovely rusty colour of the burnt sienna, and these paler sections peeping through as well. So all I'm going to do now is just repeat this same process for the broken light pole that's sticking out on the right side here, along with a little bit of Payne's Grey. My apologies, I did forget to turn the camera on at this point, but you can see, I hope, that the process is exactly the same. Just a few little pops of burnt sienna to create some rusty effects, and then going along with a flat brush in a similar manner as before and adding in some Payne's Grey for a bit of shadow. So now that's all I'm going to do on that section of the painting. I'm again using Payne's Grey, and I'm just starting to add these really simple bird shapes on the wires here. And for this I'm just using a small round brush, but you can use whichever brush feels the most comfortable for you to put in these kind of details. And you can see as well that I'm trying to keep these shapes really quite impressionistic, especially as we're going to be painting quite a lot of them. You really want the impression of a flock of birds rather than having to sit there and draw out each bird by hand with great detail. I'm also being sure to place some of my birds at different angles, sort of facing the other way, so to speak, and I want to place them in sort of quite natural looking clusters, as you can see here, sort of groups of ones or twos, and then some sort of areas sort of like around the central part of the pole there, where they would perhaps more naturally cluster together. Now, in the reference photo that inspired this painting, there is only a small handful of birds on the telegraph wires, but I decided to add a few more, as you can see. Where I live in the UK, we sometimes get these wonderful, huge starling flocks, particularly in the winter, but we do get them all year round, and they're just lovely to see, these little congregations of sparkling black birds. So that's what's inspired me today to add many more birds onto these wires than is perhaps necessary. But if you see a huge starling flock in full flight, a murmuration I think they call them, then really it is a wonderful sight to behold. So that's my inspiration for this part of the painting. And as you can probably see, I don't have the birds sort of sketched out or planned in any way. All I'm doing is going along these wires one by one, adding in the details sort of where they look like they would work sort of compositionally, so to speak. I'm also making sure that I vary the size of the birds a little bit as well, trying to keep them all quite consistent. Of course, some would appear larger to us as they are closer, and some would appear smaller as they would be on sort of wires or lines that are further away. And now I'm also going to add some birds into the sky. We want a nice sort of cluster coming in as if they're flocking to land, sort of coming in to land on these wires here. So I'm just going to start placing them in this top corner here and just see how I go. Now, of course, if you are creating your own version of this painting, you don't need to go quite so mad with the birds as I usually do. They also don't even need to be starlings. If you have a personal preference, a certain type of bird living near you that you'd like to include, they could be pigeons, for example, if you just make them a little larger and perhaps a little rounder, or they could be swifts, swallows, sparrows, anything like that. But I'm carrying on with my starling flock, and as you can see, I am going a little bit mad with it perhaps, but I am a bird person at heart, and this sort of thing gives me joy. And what other reason is there to paint than bringing joy? You can see as well, I'm just painting these birds really simply with a nice little almost V shape of the wings, just varying that placement a little bit, having some wings pointing up, some pointing down, some birds large, some birds small. You can see a couple of very small ones in the distance there. And I think it's key to keep a relative consistency with the shapes that you're doing, but also enough variation so that it looks like a little natural bird flock rather than just the one bird that has been sort of copied over and over again, so to speak. And there we are. I think that is almost enough birds for one day and certainly for one painting. So here is the finished work. Thank you everybody for watching along. I really hope you enjoyed it. Please do let me know in the comments if you'd like to see some more of these sort of line and wash sort of drawing based artworks from me. I really enjoyed doing this one. It's a really interesting way to paint and to use watercolour and mixed media, I think. So very happy to do some more. But that's all from me this week. I hope that wherever you are and whatever you're up to, you're having a wonderful day, and I look forward to seeing you all again soon in the next video. So bye for now and happy painting.